Welcome back to part 2 of trigonometry. To revise, we have sine, S-I-N-E, we have cos, or the cosine, we have tan, or the tangential, and each of those compares two sides. Do you remember which sides sine compares? Sine compares the opposite and the hypotenuse. Cos compares the adjacent and the hypotenuse. And tan compares the opposite and the adjacent. There is a common trick to remembering which ratio is which by using the letters. We have so, ka, toa. It has a nice ring to it. So we have so, ka, toa. Sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cos is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And tan is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. I would recommend writing this on the top of each one of your pages while you're doing trigonometry, just to get in the habit and to help it stick in your head. SOHCAHTOA can also be really useful to remember during a test or an exam. In your questions, you will be given two things, and you'll need to find a third. You might be given the opposite and the hypotenuse, and then you'll have to know we have to use sine to find out the angle. Or you might be given the angle and the adjacent, and you need to find the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse and the adjacent are in cos, so we would end up using cos. Let's look at a few examples of what I mean by this. Here is my right angle triangle. You can see we are looking at two sides and we have an angle. So what are we trying to find? We are trying to find this side. This side here we can see is the diagonal. So this is the hypotenuse, so this is h. Now what's this side? Well, this side is next to the angle, so that's going to be our adjacent. Now which trig ratio are we going to be using for this triangle? Well, let's look at the saying. So, ka, toa. Ka had a and h in it, so we are going to be using cos. Cos theta is equal to a over h. Let's put our numbers in. So we have cos 40 is equal to x over 10. On your calculator, on your scientific calculator, if you have a look, you'll notice there's 3 buttons around the middle. Sine, cos, and tan. To input cos 40 into your calculator, what you would do is you would push cos, and you would see cos come on the screen. Then you just push 40, and that will put cos 40, and then we close the bracket. But before we do that, we need to find what our x is going to be. Now x is stuck here. It's not by itself, so we don't know what x is. So we're going to have to rearrange this equation. X divided by 10. Well, to get rid of the 10, we need to do the opposite of dividing. So what we're going to do is we're going to times this by 10, and we're also going to times this side by 10. So then this 10 is going to cancel with this 10, and we're going to end up with 10 times cos 40 is equal to x. Now, this is a good habit to get into. I put my 10 times on this side, and this is just to make sure that I don't end up accidentally doing 40 times 10, because we want 10 times cos 40, not 10 times 40. Cos 40, if you put into a calculator, is 0.766, and it's a very long number, so it keeps going. Lots of decimal places. So we have 10 times cos 40. And if you put 10 times cos 40 into a calculator, you will get 7.66. I like to use 2 decimal places, and that ends up being our length of x. So x is 7.66. And that makes sense because if you look at my triangle, this is my longest side, which is 10, and my x here, it's not quite as long as my 10, but it's pretty close. And 7.66 is pretty close to the length of 10. Let's look at another example. What sides of my triangle do I have here? Well, I have my hypotenuse, and I have, what side is this one? Well, this side is opposite my angle, so it's going to be opposite side. So this is my opposite. Now, which trig ratio uses the hypotenuse and the opposite? Well, let's quickly write out our saying here. SOHCAHTOA. See, we're going to be using sine, because sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. So sine, what is our angle? Our angle is 35. And our opposite is 5. And our hypotenuse is the x. Now, this time, our x is on the bottom. It's not on the top. But that doesn't make any real difference to trigonometry for our first step because we're still going to do the same thing. This 5 on the top, it's stuck up there. We have here 5 divided by x. Well, we didn't do anything with the 5. We have a divide by x, so the opposite of dividing by x would be timesing by x, but we have this 5, and we don't have anything to do the opposite to. So we are going to do the same process as before. We're going to times by the bottom. We're going to times this side by x, and we are going to times this side by x. We end up with x times sine 35 is equal 5. Now, this doesn't really help us solve, but it actually gets us closer. Here I have x times sine 35. We want this x to be by itself. We can get rid of this sine 35 by doing the opposite of timesing by sine 35. The opposite of timesing by sine 35 is dividing by sine 35. So we're going to divide both sides by sine 35. And we end up with x is equal to 5 over sine 35. Now, if we put this into a calculator, we are going to get x is equal to 8.717. Now, I like my answers to be in 2 decimal places. If you ever get a question that doesn't ask how many decimal places, I always put in 2. So this here is a 7 on the end, so that's going to make our 1 round up because it's above 5. So my x is equal to 8.72. Let's do one more example on finding the angle instead of one of these sides. We're going to be using what is called arc sine, arc tan, and arc cosine. Let's go do that now.